Hey, come see us on tour. We're going to be in Los Angeles, Columbus, Ohio, Dayton, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Lexington, Kentucky, Burbank, California, and Honolulu. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.
This is going to be a deep dive into the heart of darkness. I did a supercut of Kamala's Ellipse speech from last night, along with some footage of the crowd. So let's get into it. So Kamala went to the spot where Donald Trump gave his infamous January 6th speech. Now, you might have noticed there were no protesters at her speech. Very, very strange, especially given that we know that there were protesters there.
Speech here in the Valley of Peace. She wants us to go out and vote for her, but she has yet to even come close to saying anything about the arms embargo. There's almost 200,000 Palestinians have died. Israel is doing all of this with our tax dollars, and we're supposed to go to the polls and vote for her? Absolutely not. She wants us to go out and vote for her. Show us why. Show us why we should vote for her. This is your chance. You have 1 week left. Show us that you're on the side of humanity. Show us why we should go out to the polls and vote for you. Show us why we who organized for Biden in the last election should get out to the polls and put a Democrat back in office. Show us why.
Thank you.
Well, that's a lot of very, very loud protesting going on there. You would think that would have disrupted the speech. Oh, no. They had the speech behind a fence. Nothing screams democracy like fencing off the candidate from protesters, leading some to resort to climbing over the fence, and they were never seen again. So here's some footage of that. So you can see they made sure to keep the protesters here. And that is why you did not hear any protesters. They kept them outside the fence. So we're going to go blow by blow, step by step, some of the highlights or lowlights of Kamala's speech and debunk some of what she had to say, and also point out where some of the points that she made actually could be damaging to the Trump campaign. I will say on style points, I've always said this about Kamala Harris, if she rehearses and she's programmed and she knows exactly what she's supposed to do and what she's supposed to say, she can be an effective speaker. As soon as you take her off script, things don't go too well. But this was about as good as she gets in terms of the stagecraft of making a speech. There were no errors. She didn't laugh for any creepily long periods of time. It was about as good as her ability will ever be.
They did not bring Andrew Dice Clay onto the stage 15 minutes before she went up to workshop new material in advance of Kamala Harris's big speech. No, hey, how's it going, everybody? Hey, why did the Polish guy cross the road? Because he couldn't get his dick out of the chicken. Oh, hey, you don't like that one? Hey, I'm joking around here. Hey, I don't mean no offense by it. Hey, I'm joking around. It's just a joke here. Take it easy. Take it easy. We love the Polish. We vote blue, everybody. Remember, get out there and vote blue. It's just a joke here.
You know what they say about the Polish? They got a big kielbasa. Hey, yo. Yeah, no, none of that. They should have done
that. They should have had they should have had a vulgar comic come out and just riff, just workshop, unvetted before the speech. That would have been a great idea, you know.
That was what James Baker suggested.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't listen to him. Okay, so she starts off with a whole January 6th thing.
We know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election.
Hey, say what you want about January 6th. At least they let the protesters in the venue, right? You can't say that about January 6th, that they locked the protesters out. Yeah, it's a very intimate gathering for protesters, January 6th.
Yes, in this case, the protesters were definitely not welcome at the speech. Now, she goes on to, it was very interesting the way she formulated it. She goes on and says, people died as a result of January 6th. She doesn't mention that the one person who died was shot by the police. That would have been Ashley Babbitt. There were no police who actually died, but she very elegantly elides that. Whoever wrote the speech did a pretty good job with what you have to work with here, which is an unelected nominee who falls apart in interviews, who's running to succeed a deeply unpopular incumbent. This is about the best you're going to do. So opening with January 6th and even doing this speech at January 6th, it also shows you how they're just completely leaning into suburban normies. Mm-hmm. This is all for them. This is all speaking their language, starting with January 6th, which most of the country could give a flying fuck about.
Donald Trump intends to use the United States military against American citizens who simply disagree with him. People he calls, quote, the enemy from within. As a prosecutor
okay, so right there, this is where it starts to get really interesting, because they're making a big point of this, of how Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy because he wants to turn the troops on the American public. And yet, under this administration right now, we had this recently published in Zero Hedge. As the U.S. prepares for one of the most controversial and closely watched elections in its history, a concerning update to DoD Directive 5240.01 has quietly been put into effect. Reissued on September 27th, 2024, this directive governs the Department of Defense's intelligence activities and now includes provisions authorizing lethal force in certain circumstances when assisting civilian law enforcement. While the directive forbids assassination, it opens the door to lethal interventions under national security conditions. So it's very interesting for her to be going up there talking about how Donald Trump is a unique threat that's going to turn the troops on the public, when under this administration, they have just opened the door to turning the troops loose on the public. And many see it as significant that they just did this right before the election. Anything, Keaton, before we go on?
Nope, go ahead.
Top law enforcement officer of our biggest state, won fights against big banks that ripped off homeowners, against for-profit colleges that scammed veterans and
Okay, so let's see what she actually did about big banks that scammed homeowners. This book is called Home Wreckers, if you want to look it up, by the way. A little bit of her record there as AG. In California, Mnuchin, that's Steve Mnuchin, now the Treasury Secretary at the time the article was written, acquired regional banks like One West with the federal government's help. The banks got billions in subsidies as they foreclosed on 35,000 homeowners in the Golden State alone, Glantz reports. That's the author of the book. Harris did little to stop that bleeding and later tried to suppress evidence of her inaction, he argues. Harris's deputies recommended that their boss sue the bank, Glantz said, citing the bank's lost share agreement with the FDIC, which stated that Mnuchin's bank could only receive payments from the government if it followed proper foreclosure procedures. Quote, if the state of California found One West violated those rules, the payments could stop, saving not only homeowners but government coffers as well. But despite a strong recommendation from her staff, Harris never legally pursued Mnuchin's One West Bank, he says. As a result, no one at One West faced prosecution and no one got their homes back. So this is, I guess, the great work she did against banks that she's referring to here. But the truth is a little different, as tends to be the case with Kamala.
Against predators who abused women and children and cartels that trafficked in guns, drugs, and human beings.
All right, this is how much she lies, because this is how soon I have to jump back in. All right, so our friend Lee Fong here did an article you should check out. He's done probably some of the most extensive reporting on the difference between Kamala's rhetoric and her record. So she talked about how she talks about this a lot, how she went after predators. The San Francisco DA's office had a policy of working with victims of the Catholic Church and releasing their files to help them with their lawsuits against the church. When Kamala became the AG, she discontinued that policy of releasing those files to victims of sexual abuse. Now, we can only speculate on why, but the obvious reason is that the Catholic Church is still a very powerful political entity in San Francisco. And as you'll see throughout her career, she has always chosen to go where her bread is buttered rather than to go and help the people. Again, in spite of her rhetoric, Lee Fong did another great article about how she brags about having run the first environmental racial justice unit, and really they ignored the big polluters and would fine people for dumping printing ink, and really didn't do anything for the poor communities she was supposed to be helping. Anything, Keaton?
Well, I mean, so far you've rattled off a few different examples. This is really, I mean, you just wrote a Substack piece about how she is sort of an avatar as candidate. And, you're speaking about her as a representation of this sort of, empty vessel for, deep state forces to sort of enact their will through her.
And you can check out that piece at our Substack.
That's right. DueDissidents.substack.com, everybody. Just so happened to mention that. But on this score too, I mean, domestically, she really is an avatar for the kind of neoliberalism that has really gripped the country for the last 40 years. And, she is just as loyal a servant to that as she is to the foreign policy state. It will be, it will be a continuation on both fronts. Right.
Well, this is why they're so invested in her. She is their ideal. A diverse woman that can deflect all criticism to sexism and racism and claim to have these high principles and Kamala Harris for the people, while she's really working for the same interests that have been robbing the people for decades.
Right.
All right.
And I did this work because for as long as I can remember, I have always had an instinct to protect. There's something about people being treated unfairly or overlooked that frankly just gets to me.
Yeah, no.
Well, unless you happen to be a prisoner.
Right.
So this is just one case. There are many instances of Kamala Harris's absolute abuse of her power when she was an attorney general. But I think perhaps the most damning and most contradictory to her claim of being deeply moved by unfairness and injustice. Her office fought to keep inmates locked up for their cheap labor. When the Supreme Court in California decided that the conditions were inhumane in the California prisons and the prisoners had to be released, her office fought to keep them locked up with the argument that they needed them for cheap labor, including firefighting. That does not sound to me like someone who cares deeply about unfairness and injustice. She also very famously fought to suppress DNA evidence from a prisoner. And in spite of the laughing it up about her own marijuana use, particularly zealous in locking up largely black men for marijuana use.
As a prosecutor, it just pains me to see people railroaded by the government in that way.
Yes, unless she's doing it. All right.
I have been honored to serve as Joe Biden's vice president. But I will bring my own experiences and ideas to the Oval Office. My presidency will be different because the challenges we face are different. Another $1 trillion in tax.
Okay, so this is a style points thing. Yeah, I guess. I mean, that's about the best you could do with that, right? I'll be different from Joe Biden. You can't say because I'm younger. You can't say because I'm not an old white guy. You can't say because Joe Biden sucks. So whoever wrote this speech came up with, I got it. Because the years have changed. It's not 20. Yes, that's the change. It's 2024, not 2020. So of course it'll be a different presidency because time moves forward.
New
It's
challenges.
linear.
New
Yeah.
challenges. I mean, that's a nice try, but unfortunately, it seems like all the same challenges are going to be with us because they've
Well,
all
sure.
gone unsolved and gotten worse.
Well,
so
she goes
unfortunately,
on.
it
She
doesn't
says
get
we
honesty
had a
points.
pandemic, and now what we're going to do is bring down prices. She says she's going to create the first law against price gouging on groceries. Yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. But yeah, that, like, what else are you going to do? Just on style points, like, what can you do? Like, they
there's
clearly
no-
felt like she has to say something about what's going to be different from Joe Biden, but all of the obvious things she can't really say.
Right.
Cuts for billionaires and big corporations. And this time, he will pay for it with a 20% national sales tax on everything you buy that is imported. Think about it. Clothes, food, toys, cell phones. A Trump sales tax that would cost the average family nearly $4,000 more a year.
Okay, so right here, she's trying to jam neoliberalism up your ass in a very roundabout way. She's framing it as a sales tax. What she's talking about are tariffs on imports. And she's trying to get working people riled up to think of that. It's very much a liberal version of the death tax, right? You call it a death tax, and people who are never going to pay this tax are going to go, that's terrible, a death tax, right? So instead of saying 20% tariffs on imports, which sound pretty good to working people, and I'm not going to argue the economics of that. You get a few different economists, they'll argue both sides of that. I don't think anybody really knows.
Very difficult to peg that down.
But she frames it as a sales tax, and you can see this is a balloon. They're trying out how can they put a tarnish on the idea of tariffs, which are generally popular, I think, with working people. And again, I'm not taking a position on whether that's economically sound or not, but that's how they're going to try to frame it.
And on top of that, you will pay even more if Donald Trump finally gets his way and repeals the Affordable Care Act, which would throw millions of Americans off their health insurance and take us back to when insurance companies had the power to deny people with pre-existing conditions. Well, we are not going back. We are not going back.
Okay, so that is one of the stronger arguments I think that they have. And in an example of total lack of coordination between the different branches of the Republican Party, literally on the same day, Mike Johnson went out there and said that they're going to reform Obamacare as soon as he wins. And he also said that they are going to take a blowtorch to the regulatory state. Now, I understand there may be some people who like the sound of that. I would say there are more people who don't. I would say there are more people who do not trust Republicans with health care, and this is not helpful to them. That along with abortion is one of their best wedges, I think.
Well, they say once you give a benefit, it's hard to take it away. Right. I remember being on Obamacare for many years, and because I was on the Medicaid expansion, it was actually very good. Like, the government plan was much better than the plan I have now through my wife's job. The flip side of that, though, is filing my taxes was brutal when I was enrolled in the Obamacare plan. I almost had my tax return denied. In fact, I did have it rejected the same year that the stimulus checks were going out. It almost cost me a fortune because you had to have a valid tax return. So it creates certain nightmares. So, and ultimately, obviously, I'm for a single payer system. I think it's it ultimately, yes, it is a gift to a lot of the very sort of for-profit forces that ruined healthcare pre-Obamacare.
Sure.
That being said, you have to tread lightly around this topic if you are the Republican Party, because
no one trusts them with it.
Despite the headaches that it caused when I was on Obamacare, I remember very, very specifically waking up the morning that John McCain gave the thumbs down, waking up assuming I would not have health care by the end of that day. I woke up with the full expectation that I'm on my own if I get sick after this afternoon. And then it came on my phone that John McCain killed the bill. And if I'm being honest, I breathed a massive sigh of relief. You cannot, as a political party, hold those issues over people's heads like that. It is never good strategy to do that.
Well, especially because you're not talking about, you described some of the problems in Obamacare. Nobody thinks when the Republicans say they're going to fix it, what they mean is they're going to fix that. When the Republicans say they're going to fix it, what they mean is they're going to get rid of it. What they mean is they're going to make it worse. That is how 99% of people are going to hear that.
Well, this is the other thing. This is the other reason I can't trust Trump with power, because Trump in the campaign in 2016 said, we're not going to have people dying on the streets. We're going to make sure everybody's taken care of. The bill that would have gotten to his desk did everything he said he wasn't going to do.
Right.
When he was on the campaign trail, and he was ready to sign it. He didn't care. He said, give it to beautiful bill, get it to my desk, and I'll sign it. So yeah, I mean, that does create that, and the Dobbs, this is what makes the election unpredictable, because you have these very, very meat and potatoes kinds of issues that cause ordinary people anxiety. They don't trust the Republicans with power over that issue.
That's
as simple as that.
Yeah, this feels like one of those elections where, however it comes out, in hindsight, it's going to look obvious.
Right.
Well, of course, the abortion issue was overwhelming, and the medical issue.
Both of these candidates,
it's going to be, of course, a candidate who never ran in a primary, who falls apart in 20-minute interviews, couldn't win. Either way, it's going to look obvious.
Yeah, both of these candidates have vulnerabilities that are major,
very large vulnerabilities.
I have heard excuses about why America can't build enough housing. Enough with the excuses. I'm going to cut the red tape and work with the private sector and local governments to speed up building and get it done.
All right, so this is the thing with shifting your base to suburban, let's face it, mostly white people. They're a big part of the reason that you can't get more housing built, because they're NIMBYs. They moved into those suburbs, they bought their houses, and they pulled the ladder and the drawbridge up behind them, and they do not want high-density housing. So to do something like this, you would have to take on not only your own base, you also have all these financial services companies that are buying up these single-family homes that don't want it. We also, we covered this a couple of weeks ago. You have these developers who can make more money building less houses. You just build more McMansions and less apartment buildings for people. And hey, it's easier, right? So the Democratic Party is so owned by the interests that want to keep it the way it is, There's absolutely no way this would happen under Kamala Harris. She wouldn't even bring it up. I don't think she'd ever bring it up again if she got elected. All right.
1 in 3 women in America lives in a state with a Trump abortion ban. Many with no exceptions even for rape and incest. The idea that a woman who survives a crime of a violation to her body should not have the authority to make a decision about what happens to her body next, that is immoral. That is immoral. And Trump's not done. He would ban abortion nationwide, restrict access to birth control and put IVF treatments at risk, and force states to monitor women's pregnancies. Just Google Project 2025 and read the plans for yourself. And look, I think we all know one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to simply agree the government should not be telling her what to do with her body. And when I am president...
And now I know there's a lot of hopium on this. No, it's a states issue. Yeah, people don't like it. People don't like it. They don't trust Republicans at all on this issue. We've seen what the results have been in elections post-Dobbs, where you have these wild, unpredicted swings towards the Democrats in deep red states like fucking Kansas. So to say that, no, it's back to the states. Yeah, okay, we're talking about politics here, whatever your personal beliefs about this are. This is a deadly issue. I would say if Kamala does win, it'll be 90% because of this issue.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say 90 is probably a low figure. I mean, I think this is probably the only thing keeping her in the game. Now, to a certain extent, polling has already accounted for a certain split vote. I've always thought the Democrats were going to do a lot better in the Senate than most people thought, because I anticipated a lot of split ballots between Trump on the federal level, but vote for the Democrat senator. We're already seeing that. You got a guy like Ruben Gallego in Arizona, fairly progressive Democrat as Democrats go, winning, not blowing out Kerry Lake, but up, and you got Trump up over Kamala in Arizona. So you have a significant cohort that's showing up in the polling that they're going to vote Trump, but vote Democrat on the state level as a sort of contingency plan because of issues like this. So that's baked in to an extent. To what extent? It is impossible to know. It is impossible to know. You simply cannot make a call on that right now. We will not know until Election Day how big that vote is going to come in for the Democrats based on this issue. Now, we know Trump has hidden votes, too. He always has. Trump has always outperformed the polls as well. That's why once the polls get close, it's anybody's guess how it's going to go. There's really no way to predict it. There are just too many unknowns. Not to mention all the ballots that are already on fire. And you add a whole other level of guessing to it.
Well, see, that's the thing. We know Trump has hidden votes, but because of Dobbs, you have a lot of normally Republicans who will secretly vote Democrat because of it.
In the 2022 Senate race in New Hampshire, the polls were tied, deadlocked. The Democrat ended up winning by 9.
Right.
So now other states, it was a lot smaller. Other states, the polls were a lot closer to being accurate in terms of what the final count was. You just don't know. There's no way to know for sure.
Dobbs has made it extremely unpredictable.
Right.
We will quickly remove those who arrive here unlawfully, prosecute the cartels, and give Border Patrol the support they so desperately need. At the same time, we must acknowledge we are a nation of immigrants. And I will work with Congress to pass immigration reform, including an earned path to citizenship for hardworking immigrants like farm workers and our dreamers. I will strengthen.
Yeah, and so now we swing to the other side. Nobody trusts Democrats on this. Obviously, this is one of his strongest issues because, well, if you're this reasonable, and I don't think what she just said, I don't think most people are against that. I think that, Americans are not, in spite of what Democrats might be telling you. And by the way, for time, I cut it, but she spends a lot of time talking about how Donald Trump is dividing us against each other. This is coming from people who have been screaming about Trump voters being garbage, which we'll get to, and have been calling them Nazis throughout it's Trump. It's all Trump. Bigots, racists, misogynists, homophobes. I mean, come on. And I'm not saying they're not divisive on the other side, but it's a little pot in the kettle to be making that point. But yeah, what she just said, yes, we close up the borders, but we give people a path to citizenship. Americans are not unfair. They're not hateful. They're not racist like that on the whole. But they've heard this before. And this is not what Democrats do when they're in power. And it's certainly not what they've done over the last several years. So I don't think what she just said is a non-starter for most Americans, but I think most Americans do not trust the Democrats. So certainly they're going to turn to Trump if this is the issue that motivates them.
Yes. Well, yeah, 100%. That's borne out in all the polls, too.
Sure.
Not surrender America's global leadership.
All right, now this is remarkable.
And I will stand with our friends because I know that our alliances keep American people safe and make America stronger and more secure. Look, world leaders think that Donald Trump is an easy mark, easy to manipulate with flattery or favor. And you can believe that autocrats like Putin and Kim Jong-un are rooting for him in this election.
Based.
I will always uphold our security, advance our national interest, and ensure that the United States of America remains, as we must forever be, a champion of liberty around the world.
Okay, that she didn't need dice. She brought her own comedy. That was hilarious. She literally did this whole thing about foreign policy. She repeated her line about having the world's most lethal military in a moment when we're on the verge of nuclear war. She talks about how they're keeping us safe, they're keeping us secure, at a moment when Netanyahu has basically told Joe Biden to go get his fucking shine box at every turn. Right. She's talking about how easy Trump is to roll over. You got Zelensky, every time he brings out the tin cup, gets another $100 billion. And Trump's the one who's easy to roll. Yeah, sure. I'm sure Vladimir Putin does prefer Trump because then maybe they could end the fucking war that you got us into. Yeah. And that to do this entire speech and then have this section on the military. She never said the word Ukraine. She never said the word Israel. She never said the word Palestinians. She does not at all mention any of the conflicts that we're involved in. She keeps it completely abstract, a commentary on Trump's character and how he's going to placate autocrats while they have completely embraced a genocidal maniac and his right-wing Likud government in Israel. And she has vowed not to cut off weapons to this country committing a genocide. And you end this really remarkable speech about your position, what you would do as commander-in-chief with, we're going to continue to stand for freedom. Wow. That was an obscenity.
Well, you also, what surprises, I shouldn't say anything surprises me, but what gets to me most, what triggers me most about that, whenever they talk like that, is the audience. When you hear the audience, woohoo, yeah, like it's just so mindless. It's so mindless, but that is the audience that they are trying to win over during this home stretch of the campaign to the deliberate exclusion of people with a good foreign policy. Don't forget, we began this piece here by showing you video. They locked the protesters out. So the people with a pro-peace and anti-war and anti-genocide and anti-nuclear annihilation foreign policy were not allowed in. They were not allowed in.
Right.
So, it's literally the case that they are appealing to the pro-war, very like Bush era, like the 22% of people who said they approved of George W. Bush in 2008 before he left office. That's who their closing argument is aimed to.
Yep.
It's that cohort of people. To the once again, intentional exclusion of everybody else.
They're going with the same playbook they did with Hillary. Well, people who are genuinely left are lost to us, so we need to go for the suburban Republicans.
Yes, and that's their dream.
Going back to our conversation with Shama and Hassan, this is what, for reasons we can only speculate, and we'll speculate more after the election on it. It's amazing that the Green Party doesn't seem to get that. It's just obvious. They only care about people whose vote they don't have.
Right.
Why would you allay their fears about you costing them the election? The only people they cater to are people who can cost them the election. That's it. They'll sooner run to these literally the Cheneys. Literally the Cheneys. And then listen to you. Now, some people have said, and they may be right, they'll sooner turn to the Cheneys because what the Cheneys represent is not really in conflict with their underlying political agenda in a meaningful way, whereas a real left agenda would be. And that may be true. But in the end, they can't enact. They do like being in power. And if they cannot get in power without you, you're going to start to break them down.
Hey, come see us on tour. We're going to be in Los Angeles, Columbus, Ohio, Dayton, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Lexington, Kentucky, Burbank, California, and Honolulu. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.